I'm Jena Burchick. I'm a documentarian and a filmmaker based in Baltimore, Maryland. And I'm my first feature film called Mom and M. It's an intimate portrait about modern American parenthood with the family, the Richard family in Baltimore. Nikki's a transgender writer. Elise is a social media influencer. And Sansa is their adopted daughter who battles leukemia in the film.
So a lot of moving pieces in this film, but a lot of families in anywhere in the world is struggling with the same story. So how did you find this lovely family to, say, hey, I want to come document you and tell your story?
Sure. So I'm an assistant professor at Towson University, and I had a student who was coming out as transgender. And throughout that process, I realized that, my approach to being a documentary filmmaker is allyship through activism. And I wanted to learn a lot more about how I could be a better ally for the transgender community. And as documentarians, we get to be explorers and have a privilege of telling other people's stories. So I actually was kind of casting different amazing transgender artists in Baltimore. And I found Elise through Instagram since she's a social media influencer and reached out to the family from there.
What I really appreciate about this documentary is that you get so intimate in their lives. You're with them all the time. You're with them through, the treatment of their adopted daughter. The wife is coming out. So tell me about getting into a situation like that and how you decide, do we bring in the tripods and the lights, or do I do it handheld? Because a lot of documentary and filmmakers are struggling with that. What do I do? What equipment do I use? So what worked best for you in this?
Yeah, I think it's important to come in with a plan and then be open to the plan changing. It's helpful because you will always have a foundation to go back to. But for me, I thought maybe I would bring in a crew after I would meet them with the camera a few times. But then I started gaining this immense trust and access that I just thought, I'm going to do a one-woman band with this. And it was difficult to do that. But I do not think that I would have had the trust and the relationship that I built with the Richard family if I would have had a crew of 4 or 5 people in their house. We spend the bulk of the film in their living room, in their house. And I think I was able to keep myself small and my footprint small. And that invited them to just live their lives authentically because of that, which also meant handheld, which also meant constantly moving. So I had one lens. I had a 24-70 zoom lens. I was handheld the entire time. I would lav them, wear headphones, try to direct and do all of the things, which sometimes is at your detriment. My post sound mixer may tell you maybe I should have had a sound person, but I think the trust was the most important thing to have.
Talk to me about building this trust. I mean, this trust usually takes, years and years to build. And you're in their, you're in their living room. You're going to treatment with their daughter. So talk to me about this trust and how you had to build this trust.
Sure, sure. I think sometimes when filmmakers are like commissioned to make a film, they have this budget and this schedule and they have to stick to that. I was going into this really exploring. And so I would spend about half of the time with the camera and half of the time just being with them. Um, Tons of conversations. There are things that people will eventually say on camera that they might not at the beginning. Originally Nikki didn't want to be shown smoking on camera. Originally Elise didn't want anyone to know she was going to sell her eggs. And I didn't have a sneaky plan to extract that. I just started realizing this is every part of this is who you are. Every part of this is your story. And so it was through being willing to be there for a long period of time, turning the camera off and just being a human with other humans, and talking about all of these things and then turning the camera on, I think was really important.
After the cameras were off, you were back in your hotel room or your office, the batteries were on the chargers. What did you learn about yourself personally and professionally while making this film? What was going through your mind, each evening, after the shoot?
uh, First and foremost, that this was a privilege. When they let me film Sansa's first day of school, she had tried 3 different times to start kindergarten and couldn't. And this was only the second or third time I ever filmed with them. And the fact that we didn't know if Sansa was going to live We didn't know how things were going to go. The fact that they were allowing me to be there with them, it put a very healthy weight on my shoulders that I needed to be reading books about what it was like to be transgender. I needed to be doing the work, doing the research, but also always understanding that this was a gift, an invitation, and a privilege whenever I was there with my camera.
How did you prepare yourself in the case that Sansa did pass? I mean, how did you mentally prepare yourself that this may have been a reality?
Mm. Ultimately, I thought that, if I don't have children, but I thought that if I did, I would be able to have all of this footage of my child's life that I would, that, that was the thing I felt like I was doing. Was, yes, it's amazing that this film is getting into festivals and I'm able to talk about it and I'm able to share their story, but it's the most important thing for me is that they have this document of their daughter's life. She, after the cameras wrapped, after I started editing, she relapsed again. She is now doing well. She's really, really doing well, but they are always in the fear of a relapse. So I'm so pleased that they're going to be able to have, and I'll give them all of my footage, that this documentation of their daughter's life.
That is wonderful. So something that you said at the beginning of this interview is that the reason you came into this project was you are an educator and you had a student that was struggling and was trying to come out. So what advice would you give to educators, whether it be, in the elementary sector, junior high sector, high school sector, or even you in the higher education sector? What advice would you give educators if they come across a student that's struggling to come out and struggling to find themselves? What helped you help your student, but what advice would you give other educators?
I think, especially with coming off of COVID, my institution's going back to being in person in the fall. We've just come off of what is arguably one of the most difficult periods in anyone's lives, but especially our youth. Being isolated is been so taxing on their mental health that I would say, when you do get back in the classroom, really listen to your students. We're under such a crunch of how much information can we cram in an hour or 2 hours, but none of that matters more than your students' mental health. And if you see someone struggling, like, don't look at the clock, just be there for them. We don't know what happens in their lives outside of our classroom. We can only see what we can see in front of us. And so you may be that one hand reaching out to that student, letting them know it's okay. I had another student, once I started filming this process, I share everything with my students because I think it's important for them to see that we're not a perfect, polished, finished product. I had another student come out to the entire class after seeing this film and feeling empowered to do so. And I don't put that as any credit onto me, but I do put that as credit onto Nikki in this film for being so brave. So I think just sharing and humanizing the process of educator and student is really important.
How did that make you feel when the student came out to the whole class? That you were a part of this person's transition and a lot of times freedom.
Mm. It's just reaffirming that there's such beautiful power in storytelling that, if you can see it, you can be it. And sometimes that's what we need. I started in the film industry working in the lighting department on really big TV shows like House of Cards, etc. And I was the only female in my department for nearly 10 years. And I didn't have a mentor that I could see. And so I think about that in every sense of the word for other folks out there, that we really need to represent marginalized genders and race, and people need to be able to see who they need to see themselves in other people.
Lastly, we want to support your film. It's such a great documentary, such an intimate piece, and I encourage everyone out there to see it. So where can we follow you on social media, and what's the film's website?
Thank you so much. So my website is jenaburchick.com, and I have an entire page dedicated to Mom and M. If you go to that page, you can get to our Facebook, our Instagram, and all of the things. And you can reach out to me directly through that as well. So just jenaburchick.com.